Caleb Hart rode slowly into the dying light of the frontier evening, the sound of his horse's hooves muted by the thick dust rising off the trail. Every muscle in his body ached, though not nearly as much as the hollow pit in his chest where guilt had taken permanent residence. He had once been known across half the territories as a relentless bounty hunter, a man who never missed his mark, but that was before the fire, before the screaming, before the night his bullet struck the wrong man and took a family that had nothing to do with his hunt. Now he carried no reputation worth speaking of, just a saddlebag with a half-empty canteen, a revolver he rarely touched, and a heart too heavy for hope. The land stretched before him like an endless graveyard of broken promises rolling dust, sparse mesquite, the occasional shadow of vultures circling overhead, the kind of country where men either hardened into stone or vanished altogether. Caleb wasn't sure which fate he preferred. Ahead lay Dust Haven, a frontier settlement barely clinging to life. He had heard of it from a passing trader who described it as a place where dreams go to dry up. That sounded as good a destination as any. Caleb had no destination beyond surviving another day, another drink of water, another night not haunted by ghosts. As he reached the first crooked buildings on the outskirts, the air shifted. The scent of smoke from cook fires mingled with the sharper tang of horse manure and the stale odor of men who drank too much and worked too little. Dust Haven was no different from a dozen other towns he'd passed through: saloons with peeling paint, a blacksmith's forge ringing faintly in the distance, a general store with a sagging porch where two old-timers sat playing cards. But something caught his eye near the well in the center of town. A girl, no older than 12, knelt beside the stone lip of the well, clutching something tight against her chest. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with grime, but her eyes blazed with a defiance Caleb recognized all too well. She looked cornered. 3 men stood nearby, rough-looking with dust-stained hats and pistols on their hips. They weren't townsfolk. Caleb could tell by their boots, spurs sharp, leather unbroken by labor. These were riders, and not the kind you wanted watching your back. "Hand it over, girl," the tallest of them growled. His voice carried across the square, sharp as the crack of a whip. "Ain't no use keepin' what ain't yours." The girl shook her head violently, clutching the object tighter. Caleb couldn't see what it was, but the desperation in her small hands told him it was worth more than gold to her. "Leave me alone," she shouted, though her voice wavered. The men laughed. One stepped forward, reaching for her arm. Caleb felt the old instinct flare, the one he thought he'd buried when he gave up bounty hunting. His first thought was to keep walking. This wasn't his fight. He had no stake in this girl, no reason to invite trouble. Trouble was what had ruined his life in the first place. But then the man grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard enough to make her cry out. Something in Caleb's chest snapped. Without realizing it, his horse had carried him closer, and his hand was resting on the worn grip of his revolver. "That's enough." Caleb's voice cut through the dusty air. The men froze, turning toward him. Caleb dismounted slowly, his long coat brushing the dirt as his boots touched ground. He was lean, weathered, his beard more gray than brown, but his presence carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much and lived to tell it. "Who the hell are you?" the tall one sneered. "Doesn't matter," Caleb replied. "You heard me. Let the girl go." The man's hand hovered near his gun, but Caleb's didn't flinch. His revolver was already loose in its holster, and his eyes locked onto the Outlaws with a steadiness that promised he wouldn't miss if it came to it. For a tense moment, the square fell silent except for the creak of the saloon sign in the breeze. Finally, the man shoved the girl away, spitting into the dirt. "Not worth the lead," he muttered. "Come on, boys. We'll find her again." They mounted their horses and rode off, though not without casting Caleb dark looks that promised this wasn't finished. The girl scrambled back, still clutching her bundle. She stared at Caleb with a mixture of fear and awe. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. Caleb holstered his revolver. "Look to me like you needed help." "They'll come back," she said, eyes darting nervously toward the horizon. "They always do." Caleb crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "What is it they're after?" She hesitated, then unwrapped the bundle just enough for him to glimpse a piece of yellowed parchment, old, brittle, and marked with strange inked lines. A map. Before Caleb could ask more, a door slammed open behind him. The saloon emptied out, men drawn by the commotion. Among them was a broad-shouldered figure in a fine waistcoat that looked out of place in the dusty town. His smile was oily, his eyes calculating. Caleb didn't need an introduction to know this was someone with power. "Well now," the man said smoothly. "What do we have here? Another drifter playing the hero? Just passing through," Caleb said flatly. The man's smile widened. Name's Mayor Brant Hutchings. Dusthaven's mine to keep in order. And you, stranger, just upset that order. He tilted his head at the girl. And as for little Emily there, she belongs under my protection. The girl's face hardened. You're with them, she spat. You always have been. Caleb looked between them, the pieces falling into place. The mayor and the riders weren't separate threats, they were one and the same. I don't know what you think you're protecting, Caleb said carefully. But she doesn't look like she trusts you. Brant's smile never faltered, but his eyes turned cold. Trust is a fickle thing out here. Best you learn that quick, Drifter. The sheriff stepped forward, then a tall, wiry man with a permanent sneer. His badge gleamed dully on his chest, though it carried no honor in Caleb's eyes. Best you ride on, stranger, the sheriff drawled. This ain't your concern. Caleb weighed his choices. He could mount his horse, leave Dusthaven behind, and pretend he hadn't seen any of this. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. But then Emily looked at him, truly looked. Her small face full of the same raw plea he had seen once before, long ago, on another child he had failed to save. That memory burned hot enough to melt away all thoughts of walking away. I reckon I'll stay a while, Caleb said finally. His voice was calm, but inside he felt the storm breaking loose. The sheriff's smile vanished. The mayor's eyes narrowed, and Emily's shoulders sagged with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Then you'd best be ready to fight for more than just your own skin, Mayor Hutchings said. He tipped his hat mockingly. Because around here, men who stick their nose where it don't belong don't last long. The crowd dispersed slowly, muttering. Caleb stood tall, though his stomach churned. He had just made a choice, one that would drag him into whatever darkness haunted Dusthaven. Emily tugged his sleeve. They won't stop until they get it, she whispered, clutching the map tighter. But maybe with you. Maybe I finally got a chance. Caleb looked down at her, at the fragile hope in her eyes. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. Let's get you somewhere safe, he said. As they walked away from the square, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped back onto a path he had sworn never to walk again. A path of blood, bullets, and choices that carved men down to the bone. But he also knew one thing. Sometimes redemption didn't come to those who sought it. Sometimes it came to those who stumbled upon it in the dust of forgotten towns. And Dusthaven, for all its rot and ruin, might just be the place where Caleb Hart would find his last redemption. The morning light in Dusthaven was a cruel kind of brightness. The sun had no mercy on weathered buildings or weary men, and the wind carried dust into every corner like a curse. Caleb Hart woke in a small rented room above the livery, though he had hardly slept. His mind wrestled with the events of the previous night, the girl, the map, the mayor's thinly veiled threat. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed, rubbing his calloused hands over his face. The scar along his jaw itched in the heat, a reminder of another fight, another mistake. He had meant to ride on, to keep drifting until his bones finally gave up. But the image of Emily clutching that parchment, eyes wide with stubborn hope, would not leave him. Downstairs, the stable boy was already working the horses. Caleb saddled his own gray mare, then stopped when he heard soft footsteps behind him. Emily stood in the doorway, hair tangled, face still smudged with dirt, but her chin lifted high. She looked more like a soldier preparing for battle than a child. You stayed, she said simply. Caleb cinched the saddle tighter. Seems that way. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. They'll come again today. Maybe worse than before. I need someone who can fight. Caleb met her gaze, seeing in it the same reckless fire he once carried as a boy when he swore he'd never back down from a fight. That fire had burned him more than once. I'm not a hero, Emily, he said quietly. If you're counting on me to save the day, you're bound for disappointment. Her grip tightened on the bundle hidden under her arm. You don't have to be a hero. Just don't leave me alone. The words hit Caleb harder than a bullet. He looked away, pretending to check the mare's bridle. But inside, something shifted. Maybe redemption didn't mean saving everyone. Maybe it just meant not turning your back when it mattered most. They found breakfast at the boarding house, a modest place run by a widowed woman named Clara Dunn. She eyed Caleb with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, but offered him coffee and a plate of beans all the same. Emily ate quickly, shoulders tense as though expecting the mayor's men to burst in at any moment. Clara leaned in as she refilled Caleb's cup. Word spreads fast in a town like this, she murmured. They say you stood up to Brant Hutchings. Not many men would dare. Maybe not many men are foolish enough, Caleb replied. Clara gave him a sharp look. Foolish or not, You've put yourself on the wrong side of the law. Hutchings owns the sheriff, the council, half the saloon keepers. If you aim to stay, you best know you're walking into a fire." Caleb glanced at Emily, who was licking beans from her fingers like they might be the last meal she ever had. "Some fires," he said, "are worth walking into." Clara's expression softened, though her eyes held worry. "Then may God keep you both. Dusthaven eats good men alive." By mid-morning, the town square was already buzzing. Men leaned against posts, women hurried their children indoors, and shopkeepers lowered their voices. Trouble was expected, and Dusthaven was the kind of place where folks preferred to watch it unfold from the safety of shadows. Caleb and Emily walked the dusty street, drawing more stares than welcome. She clung to his side, and though Caleb told himself he didn't care what these people thought, he felt the weight of every eye on him. Near the blacksmith's forge, a group of riders waited. They weren't the same three from last night. These looked meaner, harder. At their center was a man Caleb recognized instantly, Jeb Calloway, an outlaw whose face once graced bounty posters across 3 states. Caleb had hunted him once, long ago, and failed. "Hellfire," Caleb muttered under his breath. Jeb dismounted with a grin full of broken teeth. Well, if it ain't Caleb Hart. Thought you were dead or drunk in some ditch by now." "Both near enough," Caleb replied coolly. His hand itched near his revolver, but he didn't move. Jeb's gaze slid to Emily. "That little scrap's been causing quite a stir. Mayor says she's got something belongs to him. Hand her over, Caleb. You don't want to get crosswise with me again." Emily stepped back, clutching the map tighter. Caleb angled himself slightly in front of her. "She stays with me." The air grew taut, like a rope pulled too tight. Jeb spat in the dirt. "Then I reckon you just signed your death warrant." Before the standoff could snap into violence, a gunshot split the air. The sheriff stepped into view, rifle in hand, his face twisted in a mockery of authority. "That's enough," Sheriff Cole drawled. "Ain't no killing in the square. Take your quarrels elsewhere." He looked pointedly at Caleb. "You're making this town mighty uncomfortable, Hart. Maybe best you ride on." "I'll ride when I'm ready," Caleb said. Cole's eyes narrowed. "Then you'd best be ready for the hell that follows." The crowd began to disperse, but the message was clear. Dusthaven was drawing lines, and Caleb had just been shoved across one of them. That evening, Caleb led Emily out of town, past the dry creek bed to a quiet stretch of land dotted with mesquite. She had said she needed to show him something, and though he distrusted her urgency, curiosity gnawed at him. They stopped beneath a crumbling rock outcrop. Emily knelt, unwrapping the parchment. Caleb crouched beside her, tracing the faded ink. It was a map of the desert, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. At the center was a black X. "My father drew it," Emily whispered. "Before he died." Caleb studied her face. "What's buried there?" She shook her head. "He never said, just told me to keep it safe, and now everyone wants it." Caleb exhaled slowly. Treasure maps were the kind of trouble men killed and died for. He wanted no part of it, and yet, when he looked at Emily's trembling hands, he knew he was already part of it. "You understand," he said carefully. "If this map's real, there'll be more than Hutchings after you. Outlaws, mercenaries, men worse than Calloway. They'll hunt you until the desert takes you." "I know," Emily whispered. Then she lifted her chin, fierce despite the fear in her eyes. "But I won't give it up. It's all I have left of him." Caleb stared at the parchment, at the crude X scrawled across the barren desert. A fool's errand, he told himself. But wasn't he already a fool for staying? "Then I reckon," he said at last, "you're stuck with me." Night fell heavy on Dusthaven. Caleb returned with Emily to the boarding house, though he slept little. The creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind through the shutters, it all set his nerves on edge. Sometime near midnight, he heard it, the faint scrape of boots outside. He slid from bed, revolver in hand, and eased toward the window. Shapes moved in the street, too many for a simple patrol. A knock rattled the door downstairs, followed by the sheriff's voice. "Open up, by order of Mayor Hutchings." Emily stirred awake, eyes wide with terror. Caleb pressed a finger to his lips, then gestured for her to hide beneath the bed. The knock came again, louder. When Clara Dunn opened the door, half asleep and frightened, the sheriff shoved past her. Jeb Calloway followed, grinning like a wolf. Caleb stepped into the hallway, revolver raised. "That's far enough." The sheriff froze, then smirked. "You don't want to do this, Hart. Try me," Caleb growled. The outlaws spread through the boarding house, heavy boots on the stairs. Emily whimpered under the bed, but Caleb's stance didn't waver. He had been running from his past for too long. Tonight, he'd stand. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun, and Caleb's world narrowed to a single point of focus. The first shot rang out like thunder, and Dust Haven would never be the same again. The gunshot split the night like a lightning strike. Glass shattered somewhere downstairs, and the acrid scent of gunpowder filled the boarding house's narrow halls. Caleb Hart stood firm in the upstairs corridor, revolver raised, eyes narrowed against the smoke curling in the lamplight. The sheriff's rifle clattered to the floor. His hat had flown off, and his cheek bore a graze where Caleb's bullet had shaved skin. Not a kill deliberate. Caleb hadn't missed. He wanted them to know he was holding back only by choice. Next one, Caleb said, voice low and even. Won't be a warning. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. Jeb Calloway bellowed, drawing his pistol and firing up the stairs. The shot punched splinters from the banister. Clara Dunn screamed from the foyer below, ducking behind her counter. Emily clamped a hand over her mouth under the bed, her small frame trembling. Caleb dropped to one knee, returning fire. His shot struck the wall inches from Jeb's head, forcing the outlaw to dive aside. Another of Calloway's men rushed the stairs, boots thundering. Caleb fired again this time, no warning. The man tumbled backward, crashing into a table below, blood darkening his shirt. Get the girl, Jeb roared. She's all that matters. The words turned Caleb's blood cold. They weren't here to kill him, they were here to rip Emily from his protection. Rage burned through him sharper than any guilt he'd carried. He pivoted, firing down the hall as another outlaw lunged from a side room. The bullet struck true, sending the man sprawling lifeless across the floorboards. The sheriff cursed, retreating behind a beam. Calloway! Caleb shouted, voice ringing through the house. You want her? You come through me. A harsh laugh answered him. That's the plan, Hart. You're a dead man already, just ain't realized it yet. Caleb's revolver clicked empty. He cursed under his breath, retreating into the room where Emily hid. He slammed the door, shoving the bed against it. Emily crawled from beneath, eyes wide. Are they gone? She whispered. Not yet, Caleb said, reloading with steady hands despite the adrenaline burning in his veins. But they will be. The door rattled as fists and shoulders slammed against it. Emily whimpered, clutching the map. Caleb caught her gaze. Listen to me. Whatever happens, you don't let them take that parchment. You hear me? She nodded, tears streaking her dirt-smudged cheeks. The door gave way, bursting inward. Two men lunged. Caleb's gun barked twice, both dropping before they reached the girl. Jeb's shadow filled the doorway next, his pistol gleaming. End of the line, Hart, Jeb snarled. Caleb's last bullet clicked dry. Jeb grinned, leveling his weapon, then staggered as Emily swung a heavy iron lamp into his side. The impact sent him reeling. Caleb surged forward, tackling him. They crashed into the hallway wall, fists flying, grunts echoing off plaster. Jeb was strong, fueled by fury, but Caleb fought with something deeper, the raw, desperate refusal to fail again. He drove his knee into Jeb's gut, slammed his fist into the outlaw's jaw. Blood sprayed, and Jeb crumpled. The sheriff's voice rose from below. Enough. Burn the place if you have to bring her out. Caleb froze. Fire. The one thing he feared most, the memory that clawed at his nightmares. He saw it again, the flames consuming a homestead, the screams, the smell of burning flesh. His hands trembled. Emily tugged his sleeve. Caleb, the smell of kerosene wafted up the stairwell. Shadows flickered orange. They weren't bluffing. Caleb shook himself free of the memories, dragging Emily to her feet. Come on. They raced down the back stairs, past Clara's terrified face. Go, Caleb shouted. Get out before it spreads. The kitchen door blew inward as an outlaw kicked it down. Caleb shot him point blank with Jeb's discarded revolver, then shoved Emily into the alley beyond. Flames licked the curtains already, devouring the walls with hungry speed. They sprinted through the night, smoke curling behind them, shouts echoing through the town. Outlaws gave chase, their boots pounding, but Caleb knew Dust Haven's backstreets now. He darted through a narrow passage between sheds, pulling Emily after him. Finally, they collapsed behind a stack of crates near the blacksmith's. Emily gasped for breath, eyes wild. Caleb, she whispered, voice trembling. You could have left me. Why didn't you? Caleb stared at her, chest heaving. In her face, he saw not just a child with a map, but the reflection of his own past, the faces he had lost when he failed to protect them. He couldn't let that happen again, because I don't run anymore, he said. By dawn, the boarding house was a smoldering ruin. Half the town gathered to gawk, whispers curling like smoke. Mayor Hutchings arrived in his fine coat, flanked by Sheriff Cole. His face carried the smug satisfaction of a man whose enemies always seem to find misfortune, a tragedy. Hutchings announced loudly, ensuring all could hear. A fire of unknown cause. Terrible loss for our good Mrs. Dunn. Caleb, hidden in the crowd with Emily at his side, felt fury boil in his gut. Unknown cause. Hutchings might as well have lit the match himself. The mayor's gaze swept the gathering. For the briefest second, their eyes met. Hutchings' smile sharpened. He knew Caleb and the girl had survived, and he wasn't finished. Later, in the sanctuary of the half-ruined church on the edge of town, Caleb cleaned his revolver, while Emily sat silently in a pew. The priest, Father Amos, had given them refuge without questions. "You can't stay here forever," Amos said softly. "I know," Caleb replied. Emily unfolded the map on her lap. The ink shimmered in the candlelight, the black X daring them both. "They'll keep coming," she whispered, "unless we find what my father meant for me to find." Caleb studied the map, the strange symbols, the desolate stretch of desert it described. He didn't trust it. Treasure was a curse that drove men mad. But the girl's determination was iron, and Hutchings would never stop until he had it. He holstered his revolver, standing tall. "Then we'll go after it." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean it?" "Reckon it's the only way," Caleb said. "If we don't get there first, Hutchings will. And if he does, Dusthaven won't survive the kind of men he'll bring down on it." Father Amos crossed himself. "May God go with you both. But beware, Caleb Hart, some things buried in the desert are better left untouched." Caleb adjusted his hat, jaw set. "Some things, Father, are worth the risk." Emily folded the map carefully, tucking it against her chest. For the first time since meeting her, Caleb saw something other than fear in her eyes. Hope. As they stepped out into the morning sun, the town watched in silence. Some with pity, some with quiet admiration, others with fear. Caleb Hart and the orphan girl were walking into the desert, into danger, into destiny, and Dusthaven held its breath, knowing blood had already been spilled and more was yet to come. The desert spread before them like a furnace of stone and silence. Caleb Hart guided his gray mare along the narrow trail. Emily perched behind him with her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. The sun was barely up, but already the air shimmered with heat. Dusthaven lay behind them, a fading smudge of smoke and ruin. Ahead was nothing but endless scrubland, ridges of rock, and the promise of whatever secret lay marked on Emily's map. They had left before dawn, slipping past the sleeping town like ghosts. Caleb had purchased supplies with the last of his coin: dried meat, a canteen, a coil of rope, and a small lantern. Not nearly enough for the journey the map hinted at, but enough to start. Emily leaned forward, voice low. "Do you really think my father left something worth all this?" Caleb adjusted the reins, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Don't know, but Hutchings thinks so. That means trouble, no matter what's buried out there." She pressed the map against her chest, as if afraid the desert might snatch it away. "He said it would keep me safe, that it was more than gold. I don't understand. Gold ain't the only thing men kill for," Caleb said grimly. "Land, secrets, power, sometimes just the chance to own something another man can't." They rode in silence for a while, the mare's hooves crunching against stone. Caleb's mind drifted to the fire that had destroyed Clara Dunn's boarding house. He saw the smoke again, the flames devouring wood, Emily's small hand tugging at his sleeve. It had nearly broken him, dragging him back to that night years ago, when his mistake had set another fire, one that had cost lives he could never repay. Emily's voice pulled him from the memory. "You were afraid, weren't you?" When the fire started, Caleb stiffened. "Everyone's afraid of fire, but not like you," she pressed. "It's in your eyes." He said nothing. Some truths burned too deep to share. By noon they reached a dry canyon that wound like a scar through the desert. Caleb dismounted, leading the mare carefully along the narrow floor. The heat was suffocating, and Emily's face was pale with exhaustion. "We'll rest here," Caleb said, finding shade beneath an overhang. He handed her the canteen. "Sip slow, water's life out here." Emily obeyed, though her hands trembled. "How much farther?" Caleb unfolded the map, studying the faded ink. The black X lay beyond two ridges and a riverbed that hadn't seen water in decades. Another day. Maybe two. Emily's shoulders sagged, but her jaw set stubbornly. "We'll make it." Caleb almost smiled. The girl had grit, more than some men he'd ridden with in years past. As they rested, a shadow passed overhead. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his revolver. A buzzard wheeled lazily in the sky. Another joined it, then another. Emily followed his gaze, unease flickering in her eyes. Does that mean something's dead? Not yet, Caleb said quietly. But the desert's patient. It waits. That night, they camped by the dry riverbed. Caleb built a small fire from mesquite branches, careful to keep the flames low. Emily sat close, chewing dried meat in silence. The stars blazed overhead, endless and cold. Caleb cleaned his revolver, motions automatic. Emily finally broke the silence. You've killed men before. It wasn't a question. Caleb's hands stilled. Yes, do you regret it? He stared into the fire, seeing faces in the flames. Everyone. But regret don't bring them back. She studied him, eyes sharp for someone so young. Then why protect me? Why not just walk away like everyone else? Caleb's throat tightened. He thought of the family he had lost, the screams, the fire, the child's face he could never forget. His voice came rough. Because I failed once, I won't fail again. Emily looked down, her small hands curling into fists. Then maybe we can save each other. The words struck Caleb like a bullet, not with pain, but with truth. Maybe that was what this was, not redemption handed to him, but forged between them in the dust. At dawn, the desert gave them its first trial. They had just mounted the mare when Caleb spotted movement on the ridge above a glint of metal, the silhouette of horses. He cursed under his breath. Riders, he said. We've been followed. Emily's grip on his waist tightened. Hutchings' men? Likely. Caleb spurred the mare, urging her into the canyon. Gunshots cracked, echoing off stone. Rocks splintered near them as bullets struck. The chase began. The mare thundered through the canyon floor, hooves striking sparks. Outlaws shouted from above, their horses keeping pace along the rim. Caleb steered hard, weaving through boulders, every muscle taut. Hold on, he barked. Emily clung tighter, eyes squeezed shut. A rider cut them off at a narrow pass, pistol raised. Caleb fired first, the outlaw pitching backward from his saddle. Another closed in from behind, but the mare kicked up dust that blinded his aim. The canyon opened suddenly into a wide basin of cracked earth. Caleb drove the mare across it, heart pounding. The outlaws followed, relentless. Ahead, the ground dropped into a steep ravine. Caleb yanked the reins, veering sharply along the edge. The mare stumbled, nearly throwing them, but recovered. One outlaw wasn't so lucky. His horse skidded, plunging into the ravine with a scream that echoed long after the dust settled. Caleb pushed the mare harder, sweat stinging his eyes. The riders were falling back, but not gone. This wasn't over. Finally, after what felt like hours, they lost their pursuers in a maze of rock spires. Caleb reined in, chest heaving, Emily trembling against him. They'll keep coming, she whispered. Caleb nodded grimly. Then we keep moving. That night, beneath the stars, Caleb examined the map again. The black X lay closer now, maybe a day away. But something gnawed at him, the symbols drawn around it. They weren't simple marks. They looked like warnings. Emily leaned against him, half asleep. We're almost there, aren't we? Almost, Caleb said softly. But in his gut, he knew reaching the X wouldn't end their troubles. It would only begin them. He set his jaw, staring into the fire as the desert wind whispered across the sand. Redemption was never easy. And in the wastes of the frontier, every step forward came with blood waiting in the shadows. Caleb tightened his grip on the revolver resting across his knees. Tomorrow they would find the X, and whatever it was that Emily's father had left behind, treasure, curse, or salvation, would decide not only their fates, but the fate of Dust Haven itself. The desert stretched endless under the dawn sky, painted in bruised purples and gold. Caleb Hart guided his gray mare slowly across the cracked earth, Emily clutching the map in her small hands. They had been riding for hours in silence, each mile heavier than the last. Ahead, the land rose into a jagged bluff where the inked X waited, scrawled by her father's hand long ago. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. This is it, isn't it? Caleb studied the ridge, his gut clenched. Reckon so. They dismounted at the base, tethering the mare in the sparse shade of a twisted mesquite. Caleb led Emily up the rocky incline. Each step carried the weight of ghosts, his failures, her hopes, the blood spilled in Dust Haven. At the top, the land leveled into a hollow cut into the rock. There, half buried under sand, lay a weathered chest bound in iron. Time and desert winds had scarred it, but the lock still gleamed faintly. Emily gasped, falling to her knees. It's real. Caleb crouched, running his hand over the wood. His instincts prickled. Nothing about this felt right. Stay back. He lifted the lid with cautious strength. The hinges groaned. Inside, not gold or jewels, but papers wrapped in oilskin, a leather-bound journal, and a faded Union officer's insignia. Caleb's breath caught. Emily reached for the journal, opening its cracked cover. Her eyes scanned the neat script. These are my father's writings. He wasn't hunting treasure. He was— A voice cut her off. He was hiding the truth. Caleb spun, revolver in hand. Mayor Hutchings stood at the edge of the hollow, flanked by Sheriff Cole and half a dozen armed riders. Jeb Calloway, bloodied but grinning, spat into the sand. They had been waiting. Caleb cursed himself. He'd known the chase wouldn't end this easily. Hutchings stepped forward, his fine coat dusted from travel, but his smile as slick as ever. You've led us right to it, Hart. I should thank you. His eyes gleamed at the chest. Inside that journal are land deeds, military contracts, proof of corruption stretching from here to the capital. Her father was an army quartermaster who kept records that could ruin powerful men, including me. Emily clutched the journal tighter, fury in her small face. He told me it was important, that it would protect me. Hutchings' smile turned cold. Only if you handed it over, which you will. Caleb stepped in front of her, revolver steady. Over my dead body. Jeb chuckled darkly. That can be arranged. The riders fanned out, rifles trained. Caleb's pulse hammered, but his stance didn't falter. He'd faced death before. This time, he had something worth dying for. Think carefully, Hart, Hutchings said smoothly. 1 man against 7. You can't win. Caleb's voice was iron. Maybe not, but I'll take enough of you with me that the rest won't sleep easy. The sheriff sneered. Big talk for a man with a scared little girl hiding behind him. Emily's chin lifted. I'm not scared. The defiance in her voice sent a ripple through Caleb. He felt the weight of his past loosen, replaced by something fierce, unyielding. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about family. The standoff stretched, seconds dragging into eternity. Then the crack of a rifle shattered it. One of Hutchings' riders pitched from his saddle, blood spraying. From the ridge opposite, gunfire erupted. Townsfolk, miners, farmers, even Clara Dunn, her dress singed from the boarding house fire, stood with rifles raised. Father Amos held a cross in one hand, a revolver in the other. Dust Haven had come. Looks like the town's chosen its side, Caleb said grimly. Chaos exploded. Bullets screamed through the hollow. Caleb shoved Emily behind the chest, returning fire. Jeb charged with a howl, pistol blazing. Caleb dropped him with a shot to the chest. Sheriff Cole fired from cover, his bullet grazing Caleb's arm. Caleb rolled, pain burning, and shot back. The sheriff crumpled, eyes wide in disbelief as life fled. Hutchings scrambled toward the chest, shouting, "The papers! Get the papers!" Caleb tackled him, fists slamming into the mayor's smug face. Years of anger, guilt, and loss poured through each blow. Hutchings clawed at him, but Caleb's strength was the weight of every soul he'd failed. He slammed Hutchings against the chest, revolver pressed to his forehead. "You wanted power," Caleb growled. "But all you'll get is dirt." The mayor's eyes bulged with terror. Then a shot cracked from behind one of his men, aiming to save him. Caleb twisted at the last second, the bullet grazing Hutchings instead. The mayor screamed, collapsing into the sand. The battle raged around them. Dust Haven's townsfolk fought with desperate courage, driving the outlaws back. Smoke choked the air, mingling with blood and dust. When the last rider fell, silence descended. Bodies littered the hollow. Hutchings lay groaning, clutching his wound. Clara Dunn raised her rifle, eyes hard. "He deserves worse." Caleb looked at the girl clutching her father's journal. Her eyes pleaded not for vengeance, but for something better. "Let him stand trial," Caleb said at last. "Let the truth bury him deeper than bullets ever could." The townsfolk lowered their weapons reluctantly. Hutchings was dragged away, broken and defeated. Caleb sank to the ground, exhausted. Emily knelt beside him, pressing the journal into his hands. "We did it." He shook his head slowly. "You did it. Your father's words, your courage, that's what saved this town." Her small hand found his. "Number, we did it together." Caleb felt something unfamiliar warm his chest. Not pride, not redemption, something stronger, belonging. By sunset they returned to Dust Haven. The townsfolk gathered in the square, battered but alive. For the first time, hope flickered in their eyes. Clara Dunn embraced Emily like a daughter. Father Amos raised the journal high, declaring that justice would be served. Caleb stood apart, watching. For years he had been a drifter, a man with nothing but guilt. Now, a child leaned against his side as if he had always been her protector. "Will you stay?" Emily asked softly. Caleb looked at her, then at the town. The scars of fire and blood remained, but so did the strength of people who refused to break. He placed his hat back on his head. "Reckon I've got nowhere else to be." Emily smiled, her small fingers slipping into his. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in crimson and gold. And for the first time in years, Caleb Hart felt at peace. Dusthaven had given him more than a fight. It had given him a family, and in that quiet moment, he understood. Redemption wasn't found in running from the past. It was found in standing for the future.